I didn't notice when my life stopped being mine. There was no moment where someone took it away. No argument. No accident. No clear turning point. It just drifted. One small compromise at a time. If you had asked me years ago whether I was happy, I would have hesitated just long enough to hide the truth and said yes. Not enthusiastically. Not convincingly. But politely. Like an adult who knows better than to expect too much. That was my first mistake. I learned early how to be reasonable. How to adjust expectations. How to choose what made sense instead of what felt alive. People praised me for it. Called me mature. Responsible. Reliable. I didn't realize they were complimenting my disappearance. Every major decision in my life followed the same logic. What is safest, what is least disruptive, what will cause the smallest reaction. I didn't chase dreams. I negotiated with them until they were quiet. I remember standing in front of a mirror one morning, brushing my teeth, suddenly struck by the thought that I had not made a single choice in years that scared me. Not because I was brave, but because I had learned how to avoid wanting anything dangerous. That scared me more than fear ever had. My days were predictable. Alarm. Work. Conversations that repeated themselves with different dates attached. Even my emotions followed a schedule. Mild stress. Mild relief. Mild boredom. Everything carefully moderated. Nothing burned. Nothing collapsed. Nothing bloomed. People think suffering has to scream to be real. Mine whispered. Constantly. Soft enough to ignore, loud enough to drain me. At night, when everything finally went quiet, I felt it most. A dull pressure behind my eyes. A sense that time was passing through me instead of with me. I would replay moments from years ago, wondering when exactly I stopped feeling like the main character in my own life. The answer was uncomfortable. I stopped when I realized that being myself would cost me approval. So I adapted. I became what fit. I learned which opinions were acceptable. Which dreams were childish. Which emotions were inconvenient. I edited myself in conversations, relationships, plans until the original version of me existed only as a vague discomfort I couldn't name. And the world rewarded me for it. Stable income. Predictable future. Familiar faces. A life that looked complete if you stood far enough away. Inside, I felt like I was watching someone else live it. The breakdown didn't come as a dramatic collapse. It came as a question I couldn't escape anymore. If nothing changes, will I survive this life? Not physically. Existentially. I started noticing how often I said one day. One day I'll do that. One day I'll change this. One day I'll feel ready. One day became a placeholder for everything I was afraid to lose by acting now. I told myself I was being patient. What I was really doing was waiting for permission that would never come. There was a moment, small, forgettable to anyone else, that cracked something open. I was listening to someone talk about a choice they made that didn't work out. They laughed about it. Said they learned a lot. All I could think was how foreign that sounded. I had avoided failure so thoroughly that I had also avoided experience. That night, I lay awake realizing something devastating. I had built my entire life around minimizing regret and still ended up full of it. Regret for risks never taken hurts differently. There's no story attached. No lesson. Just absence. I began to grieve for a life that hadn't happened yet was already impossible to reclaim in its pure form. Youth doesn't wait for courage. Time doesn't pause while you gather certainty. The scariest part wasn't that I had chosen wrong. It was that I had barely chosen at all. Everything important had been decided by default. By inertia. By what required the least resistance from others. And I let it happen because it was easier than standing alone in a choice I couldn't explain. Once I saw that, I couldn't go back to sleep inside my own life. But seeing the truth didn't give me clarity. It gave me panic. Because if my life wasn't mine, then whose was it, and how do you take something back after you've spent years giving it away willingly? Once the question settled inside me, whose life am I living? It poisoned everything. Things that once felt neutral began to feel unbearable. Conversations sounded scripted. Compliments felt misplaced, like they were meant for someone else. Even my own name sometimes felt wrong in my mouth, as if I were answering for a role I had been cast in years ago and never questioned. I tried to fix it the reasonable way. I told myself I just needed rest. A change of scenery. Better habits. I adjusted schedules, downloaded productivity apps, read about meaning and balance, convinced that the problem could be solved without disruption. But no amount of optimization can save a life that was never chosen. The anxiety grew sharper. It stopped whispering and began interrupting me at random moments. In the shower. In traffic. In the middle of conversations where I would suddenly feel detached, like I was watching myself from across the room. I would smile and nod while a quiet voice inside me asked, "Is this really it? Is this all you're going to be?" That voice had been there before. I just used to drown it out with busyness. Now it refused to be ignored. The moral dilemma arrived disguised as responsibility. I had built commitments. People depended on me, or at least believed they did. I was part of systems that rewarded predictability and punished deviation. Walking away wouldn't just affect me. It would disrupt narratives others had built around my presence. And I understood something uncomfortable. Part of why I stayed was because leaving would force me to admit that I had wasted time. Not lost time, wasted it. Admitting that felt unbearable. There is a strange comfort in blaming circumstances. Jobs. People. Timing. Fear is harder to face when it wears your own face. Some nights, I rehearsed conversations that never happened. Honest ones. Conversations where I explained that I was unhappy, that something inside me had been eroding for years, that I needed space to figure out who I actually was. In my imagination, people understood. They nodded. They supported me. They didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. Reality, I knew, would be messy. And I was tired of mess. So instead of speaking, I withdrew. I became emotionally unavailable without announcing it. Less present. Less reactive. Less invested. I told myself I was protecting others from confusion. In truth, I was protecting myself from confrontation. That choice, the choice to disappear quietly, is one I still wrestle with. Because silence feels cleaner than honesty, but it cuts deeper. I began to fantasize about starting over somewhere anonymous. A place where no one knew my history, my patterns, my obligations. Where I could exist without explaining why I needed to change. Not a dramatic escape. Just absence. The thought brought relief and shame in equal measure. Relief, because for the first time in years, I felt a direction that wasn't dictated by expectation. Shame, because wanting to leave felt like admitting weakness. Like proving that I wasn't strong enough to endure the life I had built. Endurance had become my main skill. I endured boredom. I endured quiet resentment. I endured myself. One evening, after another day that felt indistinguishable from hundreds before it, I sat alone and realized something that terrified me: if I didn't change anything now, I never would. Not because I didn't want to, but because comfort dulls urgency. Because the longer you stay, the more you normalize emptiness. Eventually, it stops feeling wrong. It just feels familiar. That realization pushed me closer to the edge than any panic attack ever had. I wasn't afraid of failing if I left. I was afraid of surviving if I stayed. The final decision didn't arrive with confidence. It arrived with exhaustion. A bone-deep weariness that stripped away the energy to keep pretending. I didn't feel brave. I felt spent. I stopped making long-term plans. I avoided discussions about the future. I began preparing internally for a life without the structures I had relied on for so long. And still I said nothing. Because saying it out loud would make it real. And once it was real, there would be consequences I couldn't control. So I chose the quietest break possible. No announcements. No dramatic exits. Just distance. The moment I stepped away, I expected relief to flood in. Instead, I felt exposed. Without my old identity, I didn't know how to introduce myself to the world or to myself. The question "who are you" suddenly felt impossible to answer. I had spent years defining myself by what I wasn't willing to risk. Now that structure was gone, and standing there, stripped of roles and excuses, I realized something deeply unsettling: leaving your old life doesn't automatically give you a new one. Sometimes it just removes the noise and leaves you alone with everything you've been avoiding. The hardest part of starting over wasn't the uncertainty. It was realizing that uncertainty had always been there, I had just buried it under routine. Once the noise of my old life faded, I was left alone with myself in a way I had never allowed before. No roles to perform. No expectations to meet. No version of me to maintain for others. Just silence. And in that silence, everything I had avoided finally caught up with me. I mourned. Not loudly. Not dramatically. I mourned quietly, the way adults do when they realize something is gone forever and no one is coming to comfort them. I mourned the years I had lived on autopilot. The conversations I had edited. The instincts I had ignored until they went numb. There was no clean line between my old life and the new one. No moment where I could say, "This is where I became free." Most days, I felt suspended between who I had been and who I didn't yet know how to be. Some mornings, I woke up convinced I had made the biggest mistake of my life. Other mornings, I woke up knowing I could never go back, even if I wanted to. That contradiction became my reality. I learned something uncomfortable about regret: it doesn't disappear when you change your life. It just changes shape. Instead of regretting what you didn't do, you start regretting what you did. The mind always wants a reason to hurt you. But slowly, painfully slowly, something else began to surface. A sense of presence. I noticed small things again. The weight of my body in a chair. The sound of my own breath. The fact that my thoughts, however chaotic, were finally mine. Not filtered. Not adjusted. Not pre-approved. I began to understand that my old life hadn't failed because it was bad. It failed because it was borrowed. Built from expectations I never questioned because they made me feel safe. Safety had been my god. And I had sacrificed myself to it. There is a particular sadness in realizing that no one forced you into a life you hate. You walked into it willingly because it asks so little of you emotionally. It didn't demand courage. It didn't require confrontation. It just asked you to stay quiet. And I did. For years. I don't tell this story to glorify leaving. Leaving costs more than people admit. It leaves scars you carry into every future choice. It teaches you that there are no perfect decisions, only honest ones and dishonest ones. I still carry guilt. I probably always will. Not all damage can be repaired, and not all explanations bring peace. Some people will never understand why I disappeared. Some relationships ended without closure. That is the price I pay for choosing truth over comfort. But here is what I know now, with a clarity that hurts and heals at the same time: a life you tolerate will eventually ask for everything you are. It will drain you slowly, politely, without warning. Until one day you wake up and realize you have become an expert at surviving a life you never wanted. I don't know if my new life will be meaningful. I don't know if I will ever fully forgive myself for the years I lost. What I do know is this: for the first time, my days belong to me, even when they are uncertain, even when they are lonely, even when they scare me. And that ownership, fragile as it is, feels more alive than all the safety I ever chose. If you're listening to this and feeling that quiet pressure in your chest, the one that doesn't scream but never leaves, don't ignore it forever like I did. You don't have to burn your life down. You don't have to disappear. But you do have to be honest about what staying is costing you. Because one day, sooner than you expect, you may realize the most painful regret isn't that you changed your life. It's that you waited so long to notice it was never yours to begin with.